My name is Nikolay. I've been working in Wargaming more than 4 years, and I work at Marketing Creative Services department. Our department is responsible for creating different kind of media to support and advertise many variety of wargaming products. So I will tense all my English skills and uh, try to tell you about some solutions, some ideas we found while working on recent project. And I'd like to start from the fact that everyone likes, and the first thing when I asked what do you want me to talk about, almost all people say, let's talk about spreading of decay. This effect, this shot was taken from the reel that was timed to our Halloween event in our mobile version of World of Tanks. It's called World of Tank Blitz. And this effect of decay, of rust, and this effect is mostly about spreading as itself. Because there are many ways that may spread. It may be frost, maybe some plants, maybe some swarm of insects, and so on. So I reproduced this effect on bit simplified scene. It's a lovely pig head. So I share this scene, so everyone who maybe want to dig inside, you can download. I give you a link. You can download the scene and investigate everything inside. So as you can see, there are some distinct areas of shading. Firstly, it's smooth paint. Then this paint is covered with some cracks and little bubbles. Then this paint tears off the surface and flies away, revealing another surface underneath that is corrupted and something like this. And firstly, I start with preparing the surface. I take this pig head and remesh it, but since I would like to split my surface into flakes along edges, I'd like these edges and points to be more messy, because now it's very smooth, and each primitive is almost quadratic. It will look unnatural. So firstly, I remesh it one more time, but before remeshing, I've added special attribute that is called target mesh size, and set it to random values within some range. Then remesh operator takes this attribute, and as you can see, there are edges of different lengths. Somewhere it's short, somewhere it's longer. It's not bad, but there are still some. It need more messy. So I've added in addition, I've added some deformer written in snippet. What does this deformer do? It takes, let's say, 1 point, and I have an array of some points that is neighbors. This current point, neighbors point. So then I take randomly 1 point from this array and move my current point towards that randomly picked points in some little distance. So each point is shifted a bit along random edge. So, and the surface looks very messy, and I like it. Well, it doesn't affect the overall shape much, so it's very. We may step further. So this is almost ready flakes, but I don't like my flakes to be of a triangle shape. I'd like it to be randomly shaped. It consists not of one triangle, but as many as possible, random. So I forgot to say that I convert the geometry to packed primitive, so each triangle is a packed primitive represented by 1 point. It's very convenient to, it's more convenient to work with points rather than primitives. So I pack this geometry, so each, I repeat, say it again, each triangle is a packed geometry with 1 point represented. Representing this primitive. So to get my flakes to be of random shape, I scatter a bunch of points that will act like cluster centers and make a cluster from out of that points that represent packed geometry. So as you can see, it's my flakes. So they are ready, almost ready, and they are all of random shape. Some of them consist of one triangle. It's okay. Another consists of 6, 5, and so more. Well, and after these manipulations, my surface look like this, and I colored each flake to visualize it better. So it now is it's a good idea to repack my geometry so that each packed primitive will be my flake. So I unpack. Firstly, I unpack previously packed primitive with promotion of attribute of a cluster, and create another name attribute for each primitive, and it consists of let's say a word flake plus cluster number. So since each primitive that belongs to the same cluster will have the same cluster number. So each flake will have unique name, and it may be packed by this name. Well, and this is okay, and I'm totally satisfied with this surface, and I stash it. It's brand new operator that doing something like locking geometry, but with some beautiful features, convenient. So I create another branch of network to work with only points, and this time I will make spreading animation. So firstly I must choose the point where my spreading will start off. This case I just take arbitrary point, see what number it has, and as you see as an expression, each point has an attribute of decay. I invent this attribute, and each point have this attribute set to 0, but only one point where spreading will start off has an attribute of 1. So let's say this is a kind of infected point, and the rest of points is healthy and wealthy. Well, this I painted to green and red to see the infection in full color. Well, that's my point where spreading will start. And the core of this effect is the solver operator. This magic operator that can fetch the geometry from previous frame, like time machine, and using this ability of this operator, I modify my geometry from frame to frame, and it has the all magic happens in a triple angle node. It has a very simple expression. So, to be more clear, I create this effect on a point scattered on the grid. Yes, as you can see, there are a lot of green points and one point in the center that is infected. In the solver operator, I have two input in final node in a triple angle. So the first input, this is all points, and the second input is the points that are infected. So I take the geometry from previous frame and delete all points but infected. And this point wrangle operator consists of this expression. If I force each point to look around and find some other point, if this point will find another point within some range, so it will be definitely infected point. It means that this current point also must be infected because another infected point too close. And here you can see what happens frame by frame. Before solver cooks, I have all points of a green color, it's healthy points, and one point in the center that is infected. In the frame 1, as solver cooks for the first time, some of the points find that single point in the center that is infected. So they are also become infected, and the infected area grows a bit. The next step, the more infected points and the more green points find these infected points in turn. So they also will become infected. And frame by frame, this area of infected points grows, and until it infects all points that lies within some range. Maybe it's not very clear here on the screen, but if you download the scene and dive inside, I think it will be clear for you. As a result, I have this animation. So you can see the spreading of infection among all points, and it creates nice pattern very realistic and natural, and as you uh, as you've seen, it's very simple, one simple expression and one magic node. Well, and this time, after I finished with infection animation, I may use these points to control particle movements. So I create a simple particle system, and as a source I've used the points that represent my flakes, and the number of particle is exactly the same as the number of flakes, and they have all the same numbers. It's very important. So as the decay spreads, some particles must fly away, and to control which particle must fly away or which must stay on, I use another simple expression. I created a pop wrangle. So if current particle has an attribute decay not equal to 1, it must remain at the same position, and it must have its velocity set to 0. And to modify the state of particles from frame to frame, I used another subsolver. It takes that animation, that geometry that I have shown you, and you can see it smaller. It takes each frame this data and set the particle attribute of a decay according to the data it takes from this animation. So when the particle in current frame has an attribute decay of 0, it's a good particle, it must stay, it mustn't fly away. But the next frame situation may change, and the next frame we take the information about corresponding points, and if this point has an attribute of decay of equal to 1, so we set corresponding particle attribute decay also to 1, and it means that this particle may be affected by forces, and it might be teared off and blown away. Almost done. So we have particle animations. We may use this particle information to control our flakes, and I just copy the position of particle and copy this position to position of packet primitive that is my flake, and I'd like them to rotate. So since I work with packet primitive, I must use special kind of attribute, intrinsic attribute, which is called transform and has a type of matrix. I set this attribute based on noise, and I set random axis, and along this axis will rotation happen, and I set the random amount of rotation along this random axis. And I check the speed of the particle because the faster particle flies, the more rotation will happen with my flake. And one thing that must be done, it's a point mask that is used to shade all these surfaces. I've created another scatter node and create many points, much more than I have before, because the more points I have here in my point mask, the more smooth my mask will be. In the next step, I animate this point mask using the same setup, the same animation of spreading, but this time I painted it to black and white. It's more clear scene, the gradient between white and black points. I created a trip transfer operator, and the first input is my point mask, and the second input my animation from spreading solver. Each point from left input search for certain points in right input around its position. In my case, it's 16 points, and get an average result of some attribute. In my case, it's just color. So it gives me a nice smooth mask with gradient, as I said before, between black and white, and it can be used for shading. How it can be used for shading? I save my point mask into sequence of geometry files and read this sequence, each frame, in shader. There is a operator point cloud open that reads these files and check the attribute from this file. So let's sorry, I try to explain from another side. Let's imagine a sample that is being shaded right now, and this operator PC opens the point file and looks at a position around the sample which is being shaded right now, and it takes the information from the point mask, and I use this information to decide whether I create this displacement in this sample or not. And that cracks and bubbles on surface is the vector displacement, random vector displacement based on noise, and this multiplied by the data which I get from point mask. But I pointed to read not exactly current frame, but current frame plus 10 frames ahead. So I would like to my bubbles and cracks to appear in advance before a surface will break into flakes and flies away. This area is that 10 frames that I read from point mask. So I force this mask to run before, a bit before. before flakes fly away. So, and as a result, I have such animation. You see that paint is being covered by cracks, bubbles, tears away, and flies away. I think it's not easy to get it once, especially taking into account my English skills. So I think we may discuss it later, so you may ask some questions after my presentation. So next, short story about low-cost sandstorm. This shot was taken from the reel that it was timed to another event. The sense of this event is that some vehicles from Warhammer universe appears in some magic way in a World of Tanks universe. And it appears usual for this cases way. It's some kind of portal in the sky and storm around it. One of my tasks here was to create a sandstormy environment, and I almost had no time to research real dynamic networks, real volumetric simulations, and so on. So I preferred you go in procedural way and follow the key ISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. So and I just here must be the storm, so nothing is seen. I just create a container and fill it with a noise. Voila. Okay, and I've set this noise from along one axis, so I almost get the sandstorm. But it looks very boring and very flat, and it's a shame. So next I find it another noise. This time is vector noise based on voxel position, and add this noise to the position of voxel, and the sum of these vectors was the seed for density noise. It looks like I warp in the space inside container. As a result, I have such thing that looks more interesting than before. It has some things like swirls and vortices. Not bad. But from outside, it may look like some optical distortion. But when you get inside of this volume, you'll get an impression of real sandstorm. And another thing that I must do here is to cut out the area in front of the tank, because the wind must blow around the tank but not out from the tank. I've created a zero volume based on tank's bound box, and to merge with storm volume using operation merge method multiply. So the volume in this area is multiplied by 0, so you see the gap in front of the tank, and the camera that looks to this position, and show you again. As a result, I had a nice environment for things like this. To emphasize the power of wind, I created some particle animation with some random geometry instanced on it, but it's this approach saved much time for me and almost saved the project. Maybe it didn't take much time to set up, and it's as simple and very efficient way, as you may see yourself, that I think that as a result I get very realistic environment. It's some minutes. Well, I convert it into operator type library and just copy paste everywhere where we need such environment. And at the end of my presentation, I'd like to share the history of my first finite element solver using in production. This reel was timed to our new engine release, and our director wanted to emphasize the power, the brutality of new game, and so on. And he invented this shot, and well, I had to crash this car in some way. The first and obvious thing that came to head is just you get nice car, you take this car into your favorite 3D application, deform it, and when tank falls, you just switch one model to another. But it's a trick, and we decided to go more realistic way. So this was the case when I tried finite element solver for the first time in production. So I take this car and separate into some logical pieces: hull, doors, glass, and so on. Then just press the button on the shelf. I get this special kind of object that is called tetrahedral mesh that is wrapped around my source geometry, and as a matter of fact, finite element solver works only with this type of geometry, with tetrahedral. It looks rather rough and low polygonal, but it's okay. I will add some details after simulation. So here each part of the car meet each other in dynamic simulation, and as you can see, I have different solid objects. I can set different parameters for each of them, and it took me a lot of time to find the most suitable parameters to create metal-like deformation. And when I found these parameters, the overall time that was spent only for calculation, it was about 2 hours and a half, somewhere like in this range. Well, This this is what I get after I simulated this network. So not bad, but it needs more detail that I've said before. It doesn't look like a deformed sheet of metal. To be more, to look more like deformed metal, I added a noise. In my case, I just create a combination of whirling noise that give me nice wrinkles and dents. It's almost exactly what I want when I want to create effect of crushed metal surface. So I've added this deformer, and my surface become to look better. And another thing that I must add, it's a bit of jiggling, because when tank falls, it makes some movements like trampling, and before move away, and this surface must react in some way. And I've created another deformer, noise deformers, that just distorts point positions, and I'd like in some areas of my surface to jiggle more, and some areas to jiggle less. And I pick an arbitrary point, and each point that is being deformed, check the distance to that point that I picked as the point with the maximum distortion. So the far current point from the farthest current point from the area with maximum jiggling, the less jiggling it gets. Well, as a result, I get something like you get an impression like something really tough, really huge, presses from above and doing something. Well, and the result is not so bad, but I must pay more attention to headlights. But they too suddenly disappears. Well, that's all for now. Thank you for your patience. And you may scan a link to the scene with the pig head if you want. If you cannot do that, you may write to my email. I'll send you a link by email. So, if you have questions, you may ask. Okay. You.
For the sandstorm, did you just use a volume around the objects, or also create a vector field to offset nicely the sandstorm?
In what
Tanks,
case? With
yeah.
tanks? For what?
For the sandstorm, how did you make it bend around the objects that you had inside?
Oh, it's bended by procedural way. I'll show you. Well, this ugly volume, it has one noise, which is calculated out of position. Just we take voxel position, get some noise data, and this is a density. In this case, happens almost the same, but the position of the voxel each time a bit distorted with another noise. So this is not dynamic. This is not some simulation. It's just clear procedural, mathematical way, and I just get, let's say, in other words, I just get voxel position and add to this position some random vector.
Yeah, that
Another.
I understand, but the object you put inside this volume, the tanks, you said that you want to have it
It
move around so the camera would view it nicely. Did you add anything?
yes, I just okay.
Like this? Yeah, this part.
Yes, this I just take bound for out of this tank and create another volume inside of this bound. This volume have a value of 0. Just nothing. It's just a rough approach. So I get something that I can use like a multiplier in this time. I just multiply the area in front of the tank by 0. So with the volume merge operator. Other questions? So I'll be here somewhere around, so don't hesitate to ask in personal. Thank you.